Hey guys, happy Monday. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Hope you're ready to get to it. Before we start off with our lesson today, I want you to make sure that you have gone into Teams and seen the assignment that is listed as registration. 7th grade registration for your electives is important that you do. I want you to make sure that you have done that, selected your electives, so you kind of have first crack at what you want to take, what classes you want to take for your electives next year. So if you haven't done that yet, please do. All right. So let's go ahead and start talking about what chapter we're going to be doing this week. And that's chapter 26, The Rise of Democracy. The essential question that we're going to be talking about during this chapter is, how did democracy develop in ancient Greece? Like always, our assignment is going to be found in Teams, and we're going to have our student notebook, a writing portion, and we'll also have an exam that will be on Teams later this week. In our introduction, you're going to see that Greeks did not see all of Greece as one state. Instead, they identified their hometowns as cities. Now, each city is going to have its own laws, armies, and money, and they are going to be called city-states, partly because they were about the size of cities that we have today, but they operated as their own governments. They did not see themselves as a full country like in the United States. You know, I'm in Washington, somebody's in California, somebody's in Illinois, but we see ourselves as the United States. They didn't see themselves that way. Instead, they really prided their own city-state as their home. Now, ancient Sumerians also had city-states, just like the Greeks do, and there's been a couple of similarities that we have talked about between the two. Each city-state is going to have its own form of government as well. So it's not going to be like, oh, hey, Athens is doing that type of government, well, let's do that too. No, they did their own thing. This lesson, we're going to show you 4 different types of government which were formed in Greek city-states: a monarchy, an oligarchy, a tyranny, and a democracy. We're going to learn about what each system does and how eventually one system had led to another. From 2000 to 800 BCE, early city-states are going to be ruled by what's called a monarchy. Monarchies are governments in which the power of rule is put into a single person. In Greek city-states, this is known as kings. Now, this would kind of be like if the United States had a president who didn't have to answer to anyone. They could do whatever they wanted, but we do not have that kind of system. That's one of the things that makes us different. In Greek city-states, monarchies would not be ruled by a queen, however. And eventually, when a king died off, another person would have to become king. And often, that was the king's firstborn son. Many people came to power through inheritance this way. In some city-states, a small group of rich, land-holding men called aristocrats, they insisted that the kings were voted upon rather than put there through inheritance. Kings are going to possess a lot of power. They're going to be able to create laws, act as judges, conduct religious ceremonies, lead the armies, and they're going to be able to punish people who didn't follow those laws and pay their taxes as well. The aristocrats that are going to advise the king, they're going to have very little power, but they're going to be hugely important. If a king's wanting to go to war, he's going to need money, and he's going to rely on those aristocrats and their money to help supply the soldiers with horses and armor. Very soon, aristocrats are going to realize that because of this, they're stronger as a group than their king is. And some of them are going to want some power as well. From about 800 to 650 BCE, those aristocrats who got together and said, hey, you know what, we're really, really powerful, we should rule some of these city-states, they're gonna. And that's going to be called an oligarchy. Now, most oligarchs were aristocrats, but some oligarchs were wealthy merchants. Oligarchs are going to live a really good life. Their lives are going to be spent having fun, going to parties, going to races, doing these cool events, just living it up. Now, unlike these rich oligarchs and aristocrats and merchants as they were, the poor are going to be required to work long hours, and they're going to have difficult jobs like farming. The poor are going to recognize the difference between the lives of the oligarchs and their own, and they're going to realize that they're not very happy about it. Oligarchs, when they're making their laws, they're going to really ignore a majority of the people, and instead they're going to pass laws which are just going to benefit themselves and benefit their other rich buddies and increase their own power. And sometimes they're going to use the army to enforce these laws if that's necessary. Under oligarchies, the majority of the people who were poor, they got really sick of seeing the rich get richer while the poor was getting poorer. So they're going to start to turn to other leaders who they feel like do a better job of representing their interests. Some of these leaders are going to be in the army, and they're going to use the army to use the soldiers to remove the oligarchs from power. Starting in about 650 to going to about 500 BCE, those leaders who the poor had turned to, who used the army to get rid of the oligarchs, they're known as tyrants. In a tyranny, the ruling power belongs solely to one person who is not a lawful king. That's someone who is running the country because they took power by force. Sometimes this is known as a dictatorship. Tyranny is going to differ from monarchs, however. Tyrants can't claim that the laws of the land gave them the right to rule, and there are really no legal limits to their power. And their children typically do not get to rule next like a monarchy allowed. Tyrants in ancient Greece typically ran the country by force, but they were often pretty popular with the poor, because it was often the poor that encouraged them to take on the government. Sometimes, canceling the debts of the poor was something tyrants would do. But sometimes they were also mean to the aristocrats and they would just take their land. But not all tyrants were known to help the people. A ruler by the name of Hippias, who ruled very well, and his brother Hipparchus were rulers of the city-state in Greece called Athens. Now, enemies of the brothers killed Hipparchus, and from that, Hippias started ruling very harshly. He started paying spies to check on people and report anyone who had said anything bad about him. And finally, he was actually driven from power because of this. Starting about 500 BCE, a new type of governing body is going to sweep all of Greece, and that is going to be democracy. Now, democracy broken down is the rule by the people. In democracy, citizens share the power. Now, ancient Greek democracies are going to differ from democracies like we have today in the United States. They're not the same thing exactly. In ancient Greece, they had what was called a direct democracy, which means that anybody who was able to vote could vote on any issue. We in the United States have a representative democracy because we vote for a few people to represent all of us to vote on big things. So instead of them making a law and waiting for 320 million people to pass it, they make a law and then the people that we chose to represent us vote on it for us. In Athens, a direct democracy worked this way. The city had an assembly or a lawmaking group. In the assembly, any free man could speak and vote on a new law or proposal to declare war. Free men also controlled the city's businesses during this time. Now, from time to time, powerful speakers could sometimes persuade people to vote unwisely. Sometimes the assembly would reverse important decisions within just a few weeks of them being voted on. This type of power within the lawmaking group would cause city-states to return back to dictatorships or oligarchies.
Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. We are moving into Unit 5, Lesson 26, The Rise of Democracy. So as I'm sure Mr. Cantwell's already covered, this lesson basically focuses on 4 different types of government. During this section, you guys are going to be focusing on monarchies, oligarchies, tyranny, and democracy. Be focusing on the different types of government and their characteristics, and basically forming your own opinions as to which form of government you would prefer to live under. Now, for this part of the video, I'm going to be going over your processing question. You guys are essentially taking the four forms of government: monarchy, oligarchy, tyranny, and democracy, and you are going to give them a letter grade: an A for excellent, B for very good, C for average, a D for poor, and an F if you feel that they failed. And you're going to be ranking them on in three categories. The first category is making efficient decisions. So, based on the type of government that you're focusing on, how did they make decisions? Who made decisions? Did the people have a say in what went on? Take all of that into consideration and give a letter grade for each of those forms of government on their ability to make efficient decisions. The next category is giving equality to all people. Under each specific form of government, did people live equally? Did they have the same rights? Did they have the same privileges as everyone else in the government, or was it not equal? Okay, so give them a letter grade based off of giving equality to all people. And lastly, what you're going to do is give them a letter grade on meeting the needs of the people. Were the people taken care of? My camera's starting to slide here. Were the people taken care of? Did they have their needs met? Or were they going hungry and didn't have a roof over their head? So again, kind of take a look at how each form of government ruled, and you may have to make some inferences based off of how they make decisions and how they rule. But for the most part, you should be able to look through the book and figure out, hey, this is how these guys make decisions, and this is how they give equality or don't give equality to all people. And you know what? These guys do meet the needs of all people, or they kind of meet the needs of all people, or they don't really meet the needs of all people. Lastly, what you're going to do with this is, once you give a letter grade for all four forms of government, for all three categories, you are going to decide which of the four forms of government that you think deserves the highest overall grade, and then you're going to write a paragraph explaining why. In your paragraph, you must use IQIA. Again, the question is, which of the four forms of government do you think deserves the highest overall grade, and why? So you need to include that question in your answer. And in your answer, you also need to explain why the form of government that you chose deserves the highest overall grade, by addressing and explaining how that form of government made decisions, gave equality to all people, and met the needs of all people, or didn't do those things. So that is our processing for this week. You will have a question on your assessment that's very similar to this. So just make sure that you guys are going back through the book. You're checking all the facts on the characteristics of each form of government, and you are doing this correctly. So I hope you guys all have been doing well, and yeah, that's it for this week.